Progressive Democrats are making their complaints about Attorney General Merrick Garland public. Over a dozen said in a letter he has failed to reverse the, quote, weaponization and politicization of the Justice Department, which they say happened under the Trump administration. A letter sent to Merrick Garland on Monday says that restoring faith in the department will not come solely from a return to previous norms, adding, quote, DOJ must address the unprecedented shattering of those norms, clearly communicate to the American people the real damage that was done, and commit to accountability for the previous administration. It was signed by Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal and 8 other Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee. Pressure on Garland has increased with public awareness about controversial Trump-era policies, from leak investigations to defending the former president in a criminal case. The Washington Post's Devlin Barrett writes, quote, how he charts his way through the current controversies and still unresolved politically sensitive cases is likely to determine how much of a long-term impact the Trump presidency has on the Justice Department. And Devlin joins me now with more on his reporting. Devlin, welcome. How have some of the recent decisions by the Justice Department undermined Democratic criticisms of former Attorney General Bill Barr?
So there's been 2 noted cases recently, Elaine, where you saw essentially the Garland Justice Department take a very similar position to the Barr-Trump Justice Department. One involving a Justice Department document about the Mueller investigation into President Trump, and the second involving a private lawsuit, a defamation case brought by a woman who has accused Donald Trump of raping her many years ago. And in both those cases, the Garland Justice Department, the Biden Justice Department, came down in more or less the same legal posture as the Trump officials who helped handle that case before. And that has angered some Democrats. And that's what you're seeing in that letter and in other comments that some Democrats are making, that they're frustrated that the Justice Department right now isn't doing more to undo everything that happened at the Justice Department during the Trump administration.
So I know it's early yet, but has there been reaction, Devlin? Has Attorney General Garland addressed any of the criticism?
He has. He has told lawmakers he hears the criticism and he understands it, but he's trying to lay down a very important marker, and that's that he has to follow the rule of law. There can't be one set of rules or precedents or legal posture for Democrats and another for Republicans, and that he wants to make sure that, you know, what people have around him have described to me is that no improper considerations infect the decision-making process at Justice. Clearly, that's what they felt happened when Bill Barr was the Attorney General, when Trump was the president. And they're trying to say, look, we're not always going to give either the White House or other Democrats what they want, but we're always going to follow the rule of law. And that's their argument. That's their pushback to this criticism they're getting.
Well, President Biden said that he chose Merrick Garland to restore impartiality to the Justice Department. He said the agency would, quote, act totally independent of me. So when you look at the landscape so far, Devlin, has that been true?
It has been true in some instances and not true in others. For instance, there was a controversy surrounding some subpoenas looking for reporters' phone records and lawmakers' phone records. Initially, when those cases started becoming known publicly, the Justice Department defended that policy, and then Biden just came out and said, no, we're not going to do that. That's just wrong to take phone records of reporters. So there is an area in which the White House and the Justice Department can talk and coordinate on policy questions. The big concern during the Trump era was the president influencing or directing criminal investigations, and that is the bright line that Garland and his aides say they're not ever going to cross.
Do we know why Merrick Garland is not pursuing some of what critics have said were questionable interactions between the Trump administration and the DOJ under the Trump administration?
Well, I think the Inspector General is looking at a lot of those issues, and so there's this dance going on both at the FBI and the Justice Department to, essentially try to get on with their work, try not to get bogged down too much in Trump-era issues, and at the same time let the Inspector General investigation and that process take some of the heat and the question and the public attention from them.
So at the same time, Devlin, as you know, there are two cases which began under President Trump that remain unresolved. What are those cases, and do you have any idea of when they may be completed?
Right. There's two legacy cases that are very politically fraught, one being the investigation that was opened in 2018 into President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, over his taxes and finances. That case seems to have been puttering along without really gaining much steam for a long time, and it's very unclear when and how that will be resolved. The other is the Durham investigation. A guy named John Durham is currently serving as the special counsel to investigate how the FBI and CIA investigated Russian election interference back in the 2016 election. Republicans and conservatives have invested a lot of capital in the notion that Durham is going to eventually come forward with some damning accusations against either Democrats, the deep state, or both. And that one, too, is another one that seems to have gone on for a very long time, and you don't see much activity on the surface of that case for some time. And, you know, those are both, however those get resolved, those will be big points of argument, points of contention between Democrats and Republicans.
Finally, Devin, what are some of the recent DOJ decisions that liberals have applauded but are getting far less attention?
Right. So there's been a couple. There's been, for instance, they decided to undo a Trump administration policy that basically made it much more difficult for any immigrants to get asylum based on claims of a fear of gang violence or domestic violence. That is a issue that's been debated in the immigration world for some time, and the Trump administration basically said we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that that is not a valid reason for granting asylum. The Biden administration has undone that. That's certainly a sign that I think liberals are happy about. There's also been a couple cases where they filed state, essentially, position papers in other lawsuits supporting the rights of trans students in various situations and their right to participate in athletics and other events. And that is another thing that liberals are happy to see. But what's telling, I think, is that the Trump-related cases are just so much more interesting and important to a lot of liberals than some of these policy questions.
Right, absolutely, and a sign of just how sort of politically charged, to borrow your phrase, this whole issue of DOJ and the cases that it pursues has really become and remains in this post-Trump administration, now with the Biden administration. I'm sure liberals are continuing to keep a very close eye on Merrick Garland's decisions. Devlin Barrett for us. Devlin, good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Elaine.